Shortly after midnight on May 26, 2026, police rushed to a short-term rental home on Vilbig Road in West Dallas, Texas, following reports of gunfire. When officers arrived, they discovered a scene of chaos. 4 people had been shot. 3 victims, 19-year-old Journey Griffin, 20-year-old Jaiclyn Scott, and 24-year-old Jaiden Cooper, would not survive. A 4th victim was hospitalized and lived. What initially appeared to be another deadly party shooting soon evolved into a complicated investigation involving conflicting witness statements, questions about what happened inside the home moments before the gunfire erupted, and competing narratives about who was responsible. Weeks later, authorities arrested 18-year-old Tyson mcgriff and charged him with capital murder and aggravated assault. Yet, even after the arrest, significant questions remained regarding the sequence of events, the alleged motive, and whether every witness described the same shooting.
3 people were shot to death at a short-term rental in West Dallas, including a young woman only 19 years old. And we are hearing from her family now. This all happened just after midnight Monday morning on Vilbig Street near C.F. Carr Elementary School. As Scoop Jefferson reports, it's the 2nd shooting at a local short-term rental this week.
Dallas homicide detectives are looking for answers after multiple people were shot and killed overnight during a party. Investigators recovered several casings outside a short-term rental property on Vilbig Road.
I rode bicycles in these streets.
The same street where Pastor Earl Thomas grew up.
I was told that whoever was shooting was upstairs, shooting downstairs. I'm just like, why? It's heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking.
And even more heartbreaking for the family of 19-year-old Journey Griffin, one of 3 people shot and killed, police say. 1 other person injured by the gunfire.
This is the story through multiple perspectives. Here, we deliver clear, factual, and up-to-date true crime stories. Subscribe and turn on notifications to stay informed on the latest cases and investigations. During the early morning hours of May 26, 2026, Dallas police officers responded to reports of a shooting at a short-term rental property located in the 3700 block of Vilbig Road in West Dallas. The call came in at approximately 12:20 a.m. When officers arrived at the residence, they encountered a chaotic crime scene involving multiple gunshot victims. 4 adults had been struck by gunfire. 2 victims were pronounced dead at the scene. A 3rd victim was transported to a hospital, but later died from injuries sustained during the incident. A 4th victim survived and received medical treatment. Investigators quickly secured the property and began interviewing witnesses who remained at the scene. According to police, a party was taking place inside the rental home before the shooting occurred. Authorities stated that the suspected gunman had fled the area before officers arrived. At the beginning of the investigation, police released limited information regarding a motive, suspect identity, or events leading up to the shooting. Detectives emphasized that witness interviews would be critical in reconstructing the timeline and determining exactly what occurred inside the residence during the minutes before gunfire erupted. As investigators worked to identify those involved, they focused on collecting physical evidence, reviewing surveillance footage, and comparing witness statements. What initially appeared to be a straightforward shooting investigation soon developed into a case involving conflicting accounts and competing explanations. 19-year-old Journey Griffin was among the individuals attending the gathering on the night of the shooting. Publicly available information indicates that she arrived at the residence as a guest during the Memorial Day weekend celebration. Investigators found no indication that Griffin was involved in any reported conflict before the shooting occurred. As detectives pieced together the timeline, they focused primarily on determining where she was positioned inside the house and whether she had any connection to the dispute later described by witnesses. As the investigation progressed, Griffin's name became one of the central identities associated with the case. Authorities worked to establish her movements during the hours leading up to the shooting, comparing witness accounts with available evidence from the scene. 20-year-old Jaiclyn Scott also attended the gathering. Unlike Griffin, Scott later became a significant figure in investigators' developing theory regarding the motive behind the shooting. According to witness statements summarized in court documents, Scott was allegedly involved in an earlier disagreement before gunfire erupted. Detectives examined claims that an argument involving Scott may have occurred sometime before the shooting. Whether that disagreement directly triggered the violence became one of the most important questions in the case. Investigators spent considerable time attempting to verify exactly when the alleged argument occurred, who was present during the exchange, and whether firearms were displayed during the confrontation. As evidence was collected, Scott's role shifted from simply being one of the victims to becoming a potential key component in understanding what led to the shooting. 24-year-old Jaiden Cooper was the oldest of the three victims. Like Griffin, investigators found no publicly documented evidence suggesting Cooper played a direct role in any alleged confrontation that occurred earlier in the evening. Detectives focused on determining Cooper's location inside the residence when shots were fired and whether he had any interaction with individuals involved in the reported dispute. As social media discussions surrounding the case intensified, individuals familiar with Cooper publicly challenged various rumors that circulated online. However, investigators remained focused on evidence obtained through witness interviews, physical evidence, and official records. From the victim's perspective, available information suggests the evening began as a social event attended by numerous individuals. Nothing publicly released by authorities indicates that Griffin, Scott, or Cooper anticipated becoming involved in a deadly incident. As investigators continued reviewing witness interviews and evidence, attention eventually shifted toward 18-year-old Tyson McGriff. Public court records show that McGriff was later arrested and charged with capital murder and aggravated assault. However, the path leading to his arrest was not immediate. In the hours following the shooting, investigators reportedly possessed limited information regarding the identity of the shooter. Detectives relied heavily on statements obtained from individuals who attended the party. According to law enforcement records, several witnesses later identified McGriff through photographic lineups. Investigators alleged that these witnesses had observed him before the shooting occurred and claimed he was present during key moments leading up to the violence. The defense perspective has not been fully presented through public court proceedings. As a result, the details of any defense strategy remain largely unknown. This created an immediate division between competing interpretations of the evidence. Investigators developed a theory suggesting that McGriff became involved in a dispute, left the property, and later returned before opening fire. At the same time, potential defense arguments could focus on issues frequently raised in criminal cases involving large gatherings. These include witness reliability, identification accuracy, memory distortion, and the challenges associated with observing events during chaotic circumstances. The absence of a fully developed public defense narrative left many questions unanswered, while investigators continued building their case. As detectives conducted interviews, witness accounts revealed significant inconsistencies. These differences became one of the most important aspects of the investigation. Several attendees described the shooting as occurring without warning. According to these witnesses, there was no obvious argument immediately before shots were fired. Some individuals stated they had been socializing normally and did not observe any confrontation significant enough to suggest violence was imminent. In this version of events, the shooting appeared sudden and unexpected. Witnesses supporting this account reported hearing gunfire without first seeing a physical altercation or heated dispute. If these statements were accurate, investigators needed to explain how a deadly shooting could occur without most attendees noticing any warning signs. Other witnesses provided a different account. According to statements referenced in the arrest affidavit, a disagreement allegedly occurred before the shooting. One witness claimed that Tyson mcgriff and jaiclyn were involved in a confrontation during the gathering. The witness further alleged that firearms were displayed during the argument. According to this version, tensions escalated to the point that mcgriff was escorted outside the residence in an effort to calm the situation. The witness claimed that mcgriff later returned to the property before gunfire erupted. This account presented a very different explanation from the sudden violence narrative described by other attendees. Instead of an unexpected shooting, this version suggested a sequence involving conflict, separation, return, and retaliation. The discrepancy between these accounts became a major investigative challenge. Detectives faced an important question. How could some witnesses describe a confrontation involving firearms while others reported seeing no argument at all? Investigators likely considered several possibilities. The house contained multiple rooms, meaning different attendees may have observed different events. Some individuals may have arrived after the alleged argument occurred. Others may have left certain areas of the residence before key interactions took place. Investigators also recognized that memory can become unreliable during stressful events. Individuals experiencing sudden violence may remember details differently or fail to observe incidents occurring elsewhere inside the property. Determining which witnesses possessed the most accurate information became critical to establishing a reliable timeline. As evidence accumulated, detectives began organizing witness statements into a structured timeline. One of their primary goals was identifying events that multiple witnesses consistently described. Investigators noted that several individuals independently placed mcgriff at the gathering. Witnesses also reportedly agreed that some form of interaction occurred involving Scott before the shooting. However, disagreement emerged regarding the severity of that interaction and whether it involved firearms. Detectives compared witness statements with physical evidence recovered from the scene. They examined the sequence of movements described by attendees and attempted to determine whether the suspect left the residence and later returned. the investigation increasingly focused on establishing motive. While authorities did not publicly disclose every detail, evidence appeared to support the possibility that an earlier dispute played a role in the shooting. At the same time, detectives continued evaluating alternative explanations and testing witness credibility. Each new statement had to be measured against existing evidence. When discrepancies appeared, investigators attempted to determine whether they resulted from confusion, incomplete observations, or inaccurate recollections. Although authorities have not publicly released extensive forensic details, investigators collected substantial evidence from the crime scene. This included ballistic evidence, shell casings, victim injury documentation, and physical evidence recovered throughout the property. Forensic specialists worked to reconstruct the shooting sequence and determine how many firearms may have been involved. Medical findings helped investigators understand victim locations and movements during the incident. Ballistic evidence was examined to determine firing positions and establish whether witness accounts matched physical evidence recovered at the scene. These findings became particularly important when evaluating conflicting testimony. Whenever witness statements disagreed, investigators could compare those accounts against forensic evidence to determine which descriptions aligned most closely with physical facts. Early media coverage focused primarily on the basic facts. 3 individuals had been killed. A 4th person survived. A suspect had not yet been identified. Many initial reports described the incident as a party shooting involving an unknown gunman. As the investigation progressed, however, the narrative became more complex. Court records and witness statements suggested the possibility of a prior dispute. Investigators developed a more detailed theory involving specific individuals and alleged interactions occurring before the shooting. The difference between early reporting and later investigative findings illustrates a common pattern in major criminal investigations. Initial reports often focus on confirmed facts available immediately after an incident, while later developments reveal additional context gathered through interviews, evidence collection, and forensic analysis. As the case moves through the legal system, prosecutors and defense attorneys will likely focus on several key issues. Prosecutors may rely heavily on witness identifications, statements describing the alleged dispute, and evidence placing mcgriff at the scene. The defense may challenge the reliability of eyewitness testimony and question whether witnesses accurately observed events during a crowded and chaotic gathering. Jurors will likely be asked to evaluate competing interpretations of the same evidence. The outcome may depend on which witnesses are considered most credible and whether physical evidence supports the prosecution's timeline. Despite the arrest, several questions remain unresolved. Investigators believe an earlier conflict contributed to the shooting. However, not all witnesses agree that such a conflict occurred. Some attendees maintain they never observed an argument. Others insist the confrontation was significant and involved firearms. Questions also remain regarding the precise timeline, the sequence of movements before the shooting, and the extent to which each witness accurately observed events. As court proceedings continue, these disputed facts will likely remain central to the case. The deaths of Journey Griffin, Jaiclyn Scott, and Jaiden Cooper transformed what began as a Memorial Day weekend gathering into a major homicide investigation. While authorities have identified a suspect and filed charges, the final determination of events will ultimately depend on evidence presented through the court system. By the time detectives began assembling the timeline of events, the scene on Vilbig Road had already become one of the most significant homicide investigations in Dallas during Memorial Day weekend 2026. 3 people were dead, 1 person was injured, and dozens of individuals had been present at a crowded party inside a short-term rental property. Investigators quickly recognized that reconstructing the events leading to the shooting would depend heavily on witness statements, surveillance evidence, physical evidence recovered at the scene, and forensic analysis. The first confirmed point in the timeline occurred shortly after midnight. At approximately 12:20 a.m., Dallas police received multiple reports of gunfire at a residence in the 3700 block of Vilbig Road. Emergency dispatchers began receiving calls from individuals reporting shots fired and victims down inside the property. Responding officers were immediately sent to the location. Within minutes, officers arrived and encountered a chaotic crime scene. Multiple individuals were attempting to leave the property while others remained nearby. Officers located 4 victims suffering from gunshot wounds. Emergency medical personnel were called to provide treatment, while officers secured the scene and began separating potential witnesses. 2 victims were pronounced dead at the location. A 3rd victim later died after being transported for medical treatment. A 4th victim survived the shooting. As investigators began documenting the scene, one of their immediate priorities was identifying the victims and determining whether the shooting had been random or targeted. Over the following days, authorities identified the deceased victims as 19-year-old Journie Griffin, 20-year-old Jaiclyn Scott, and 24-year-old Jaiden Cooper. The surviving victim's identity received less public attention as investigators continued gathering information regarding the circumstances surrounding the attack. At this stage, detectives faced a common challenge encountered in large-scale homicide investigations. Although many individuals had been present at the gathering, witness accounts did not immediately align. Some attendees described the shooting as sudden and unexpected. Others suggested there had been tension inside the residence before gunfire erupted. Investigators began organizing statements according to timelines, locations within the property, and witness proximity to the events. As interviews progressed, detectives noticed recurring references to a possible dispute that allegedly occurred before the shooting. Multiple witnesses referenced an interaction involving individuals at the party, though details varied considerably. Some witnesses described a verbal confrontation. Others reported seeing individuals arguing earlier in the evening. A smaller number of witnesses claimed firearms had been displayed before the shooting occurred. The inconsistencies did not necessarily invalidate the statements. Investigators understood that large gatherings often produce fragmented recollections. Different people observe different portions of an incident depending on where they are standing, who they are speaking with, and what they are paying attention to at the time. Nevertheless, detectives believed the alleged earlier confrontation warranted further examination. As the investigation entered June 2026, authorities intensified efforts to identify the shooter. Witness interviews became increasingly important. detectives conducted photographic lineup procedures with multiple individuals who had attended the gathering. During these sessions, investigators presented photographs to witnesses in an effort to determine whether any participant could identify the person responsible for the shooting. According to investigative findings later referenced in court records, several witnesses identified 18-year-old Tyson McGriff. These identifications represented a major development in the investigation. Detectives now had a specific individual connected to multiple witness accounts. More importantly, some witnesses reportedly described McGriff as being involved in an earlier conflict before the shooting occurred. Investigators began developing a theory that the shooting may not have been random. Instead, they examined whether a prior dispute had escalated into retaliatory violence. According to this theory, an earlier disagreement may have occurred inside or around the party. Detectives sought to determine whether that dispute continued after individuals left the immediate area, and whether the eventual shooting represented a continuation of the earlier conflict. However, significant questions remained unanswered. The most notable challenge involved reconciling contradictory witness statements. Some witnesses reported observing an argument. Others reported no confrontation whatsoever. Several attendees claimed they had no indication that violence was imminent. This discrepancy became one of the most important factual disputes in the case. Detectives were therefore required to determine whether witnesses had observed different portions of the evening or whether some accounts were simply inaccurate. Investigators continued reviewing available evidence in an effort to build a coherent sequence of events. While witness statements helped establish possible motives and identify persons of interest, forensic evidence remained essential to understanding what physically occurred at the scene. Publicly released forensic information in this case has remained relatively limited compared to other high-profile homicide investigations. Even so, several key facts were documented by investigators. First, authorities confirmed the presence of 4 shooting victims. This fact established that multiple rounds had been fired and that more than one individual had been struck during the attack. Second, medical examinations confirmed that the deceased victims suffered fatal gunshot wounds. Although detailed autopsy findings were not publicly disclosed, investigators used those examinations to help determine wound patterns, probable firing angles, and injury severity. Third, physical evidence indicated that the shooting occurred inside or immediately around the party location. Crime scene investigators processed the property for ballistic evidence, potential DNA evidence, fingerprints, and other materials capable of establishing movement patterns throughout the residence. Every shell casing, projectile fragment, and impact location had the potential to contribute to reconstruction efforts. Investigators also examined whether ballistic evidence could establish the number of firearms involved. At the time public information became available, authorities had not released extensive details regarding ballistic conclusions. This absence of publicly available forensic detail led to considerable speculation online. Social media discussions generated numerous theories regarding motive, sequence of events, and the identity of individuals involved. However, investigators focused primarily on evidence rather than speculation. One notable aspect of the case was the significant role played by witness identification. Unlike cases where surveillance footage clearly captures a suspect, investigators appeared to rely heavily on witness observations when developing probable cause. This made interview procedures especially important. Detectives compared witness accounts against physical evidence recovered from the scene in an effort to identify consistencies and eliminate inaccuracies. The relationship between witness testimony and forensic findings became a central component of the investigation. If witness statements accurately reflected events, physical evidence would be expected to support those descriptions. If contradictions emerged, investigators would need to determine whether memories were flawed or whether critical details had been omitted. As the investigation progressed, authorities appeared confident enough in the collected evidence to pursue criminal charges. Nevertheless, many forensic details remained outside public view as the case moved through the legal system. In the hours immediately following the shooting, media coverage naturally focused on the most visible facts. 3 people were dead. A 4th person had been injured. The shooting occurred at a short-term rental property hosting a party. The suspect had not yet been publicly identified. Early news reports therefore framed the event as a deadly party shooting involving an unknown gunman who disappeared before police arrived. This characterization reflected the information available at the time. News organizations emphasized the scale of the violence and highlighted broader community concerns regarding short-term rental properties being used for large gatherings. For many members of the public, the case appeared straightforward. A gunman arrived, shots were fired, victims were killed, the shooter fled. However, the investigative reality gradually became more complex. As detectives continued interviewing witnesses and analyzing evidence, a more detailed picture began emerging. Authorities no longer viewed the shooting strictly as a random act of violence. Instead, investigators increasingly focused on a specific suspect. Witness identifications provided a name. Statements suggested a prior conflict. Detectives began exploring whether the shooting was connected to an earlier dispute, rather than being an entirely spontaneous attack. This distinction significantly altered the direction of the investigation. A random shooting theory focuses primarily on identifying an unknown offender. A targeted shooting theory requires investigators to understand relationships, prior interactions, potential motives, and event sequences leading up to the violence. As a result, the public narrative and investigative narrative began diverging. Media reports initially concentrated on uncertainty. Investigators increasingly concentrated on specifics. The public saw a tragic party shooting. Detectives examined an alleged chain of events involving identifiable individuals, witness observations, and a developing timeline. This difference illustrates a recurring pattern in major criminal investigations. Initial reporting often reflects only the information available during the first hours after an incident. Investigative findings, by contrast, develop gradually through interviews, evidence collection, forensic analysis, and legal review. By the time Tyson McGriff was identified and charged, the case had evolved far beyond the limited picture initially presented to the public. What began as reports of an unknown gunman had transformed into an investigation centered on witness identifications, alleged prior conflict, and a theory of retaliatory violence. Yet, despite these developments, investigators continued confronting one persistent challenge. not everyone who attended the party described the events the same way. That unresolved conflict between competing accounts remained one of the most important issues in the investigation and would likely continue influencing court proceedings as authorities sought to determine exactly what happened during the final moments before gunfire erupted on Vilbig Road. As the criminal case moves through the Texas court system, prosecutors and defense attorneys are expected to focus on a series of critical questions that emerged during the investigation into the deaths of Journie Griffin, Jaiclyn Scott, and Jaiden Cooper. While an arrest has been made, the courtroom becomes the place where allegations must be tested against evidence, witness testimony, and legal standards. Investigators may believe they have identified the person responsible, but prosecutors must still prove every element of the charges beyond a reasonable doubt. The shooting occurred during the early morning hours of May 26, 2026, at a short-term rental property on Vilbig Road in West Dallas. By the time officers arrived, multiple people had been shot. 3 victims, Journie Griffin, Jaiclyn Scott, and Jaiden Cooper, were pronounced dead, while another victim survived. The investigation that followed resulted in the arrest of Tyson McGriff, who was charged with capital murder and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon. Once a case reaches court, the focus shifts away from public speculation and toward evidence that can be legally presented before a jury. Prosecutors are expected to build their case around witness accounts, the timeline established by investigators, and evidence collected at the scene. According to charging documents and investigative reports, witnesses allegedly identified McGriff as the individual involved in events leading up to the shooting. These identifications became a central component of the prosecution's theory. Detectives reportedly gathered statements from multiple individuals who attended the party, and some witnesses claimed they recognized McGriff both before and after an alleged dispute occurred. Prosecutors are also expected to highlight reports describing an earlier conflict that allegedly took place before gunfire erupted. According to investigative findings, witnesses described an argument involving individuals at the party. Some statements suggested tensions developed before the shooting, creating what investigators believe was a sequence of escalating events. Prosecutors will likely argue that this dispute provides context for what happened later and helps explain the actions attributed to the suspect. Another important element involves the allegation that McGriff left the immediate area and later returned before the shooting occurred. Investigators reportedly concluded that the suspect's movements before the shooting were significant because they may help establish intent and premeditation. If prosecutors can demonstrate that an individual left following a confrontation and later returned armed, they may argue that those actions support the charges filed in the case. However, criminal proceedings are not determined solely by the prosecution's theory. Defense attorneys are expected to challenge key aspects of the investigation and raise questions about whether the evidence supports the conclusions reached by law enforcement. One likely area of focus will be eyewitness identification. Although witnesses may believe they accurately identified an individual, defense attorneys frequently examine the circumstances under which those identifications were made. Factors such as lighting conditions, distance, distractions, stress, and the speed of events can all affect a person's ability to accurately recall what they observed. In a crowded environment where dozens of people may have been present, defense attorneys may question whether every witness had a clear opportunity to observe the same events. The conditions inside the party are also expected to become an important issue. Reports indicate that numerous individuals attended the gathering. In situations involving large crowds, different people often observe different portions of an incident. Some witnesses may be inside one room while others are outside or elsewhere on the property. As a result, recollections can vary significantly even when individuals are describing the same event. Defense attorneys may argue that the environment itself created opportunities for confusion. Loud music, movement throughout the property, conversations occurring simultaneously, and the sudden nature of gunfire can all affect witness perception. Attorneys may attempt to demonstrate that some witnesses only observed fragments of the overall incident rather than the complete sequence of events. Another issue likely to receive attention involves the possibility of witness influence. During major investigations, witnesses often communicate with one another before providing formal statements. Defense attorneys may question whether conversations between attendees affected how certain events were remembered or described. If multiple individuals discussed the shooting before speaking with investigators, attorneys could argue that memories became influenced by information obtained from others rather than direct observation. The defense may also examine the extent to which physical evidence supports witness accounts. Public reporting has focused primarily on witness testimony and investigative findings rather than extensive forensic evidence. While investigators may possess additional evidence not released publicly, defense attorneys could emphasize the limited forensic information discussed in news reports. They may argue that physical evidence should independently support key elements of the prosecution's case. Ultimately, the jury will be tasked with evaluating all evidence presented during trial. Jurors must determine whether the prosecution has established guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. This standard does not require absolute certainty, but it does require jurors to reach a conclusion based on evidence rather than speculation. The jury's decision will likely depend on how they assess witness credibility, the consistency of testimony, and the strength of supporting evidence. If jurors believe witness accounts are reliable and supported by the investigative findings, prosecutors may strengthen their argument. If significant inconsistencies emerge, defense attorneys may argue that reasonable doubt exists. As of June 2026, Tyson McGriff has been arrested and formally charged with capital murder and aggravated assault with a deadly weapon in connection with the deaths of Journie Griffin, Jaiclyn Scott, and Jaiden Cooper. The charges represent allegations rather than findings of guilt. At this stage, the criminal proceedings remain active. Court hearings, motions, evidence reviews, and future trial proceedings are expected to determine how the case ultimately concludes. No conviction, acquittal, plea agreement, or sentencing outcome has been publicly reported. Because the case remains pending, many details continue to be evaluated through the legal process. Investigators may still be reviewing evidence, prosecutors may continue preparing their case, and defense attorneys retain the opportunity to challenge investigative conclusions. As a result, the final legal outcome remains unresolved. The next developments will likely emerge through court filings, evidentiary hearings, and future proceedings. Despite the arrest and formal charges, several important questions remain contested. From the perspective of law enforcement, investigators believe witness statements support their conclusions regarding the suspect's identity and actions. Detectives have indicated that multiple witnesses identified mcgriff during the investigation. Investigators also maintain that an earlier dispute occurred before the shooting, and that this confrontation played an important role in the sequence of events. Police further allege that the suspect returned before gunfire erupted. Investigators believe this movement is a critical part of the timeline because it connects the earlier confrontation with the later violence. The defense, however, is expected to challenge several aspects of that narrative. One major question involves whether witness identifications were reliable. Defense attorneys may examine how witnesses were interviewed, when statements were collected, and whether identification procedures were conducted properly. The reliability of eyewitness testimony has historically been a major issue in criminal proceedings, particularly in cases involving stressful and rapidly unfolding events. Another dispute involves whether every witness observed the same events. Some attendees reportedly described a confrontation before the shooting, while others indicated they saw no obvious argument. These differences create questions regarding how much any individual witness actually observed. The timeline itself may also become a subject of examination. Prosecutors and investigators may present a sequence of events based on interviews and collected evidence. Defense attorneys may seek independent verification of those events through surveillance footage, digital records, phone data, or additional witness testimony. Witness disagreements remain one of the most notable aspects of the case. Some individuals reportedly described the shooting as sudden and unexpected, indicating they observed no significant conflict beforehand. Other witnesses described an earlier confrontation that allegedly involved weapons and heightened tensions. These differing accounts create competing interpretations of what occurred during the hours leading up to the shooting. Such contradictions are not uncommon in large investigations involving numerous witnesses. Different individuals may observe different portions of an event, resulting in varying descriptions. Nevertheless, those differences can become important during trial because attorneys often use inconsistencies to support or challenge credibility. Beyond the courtroom, members of the community continue to ask broader questions regarding the incident. One recurring question concerns why the alleged dispute escalated into deadly violence. Investigators may have developed theories based on witness interviews, but the exact motivations behind the confrontation remain a subject of public interest. Another question involves whether the shooting could have been prevented. Reports suggesting an earlier dispute have led some observers to question whether intervention before the shooting might have altered the outcome. The final minutes before gunfire erupted also remain a focus of attention. Investigators have constructed a timeline based on available evidence, but the precise sequence of events remains central to understanding how the incident unfolded. The deaths of Journey Griffin, Jaiclyn Scott, and Jaiden Cooper transformed a late-night gathering into one of Dallas's most closely watched homicide investigations. While an arrest has been made and charges have been filed, the legal process continues. The prosecution, defense, investigators, witnesses, and ultimately the jury will all play roles in determining how the case is resolved. Until court proceedings reach a conclusion, many of the central questions surrounding the shooting remain matters for the justice system to evaluate.